Fazal, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I want to take up the second bullet point, which is in the program. Can Islamic finance suffer the same fate as conventional finance? I want to very briefly outline what I think has been the key problem with conventional finance resulting in this crisis. There are problems which have always been there, but those were manageable. What made it unmanageable? In my view, there are two features which are linked, and both are linked to the idea of debt. Essentially, those of us who know the meaning of alchemy will realize that alchemy was the traditional science of chemistry designed to convert inferior metals into gold. If you can find a formula to make gold from inferior metals, there was nothing else left to be done. In finance, the equivalent of alchemy would be to convert inferior subprime debt into AAA rated security. If you can do that, nothing is left. Okay? That's it. That's the end of. In fact, historians like Francis Fukuyama have called it the end of history, because if you have done that, then there is no other need for anybody else to do anything else but replicate. Now, at the base of this whole idea of converting subprime debt into AAA rated securities was a new model of securitization, which was the originate and distribute model, where the emphasis was on originating debt, packaging it, and distributing it. In the chain, no participant had any stake in the underlying asset. In fact, the underlying asset was completely irrelevant and therefore neglected. And those of you who have followed this saga, you will know that later on, after the event, after the crisis, one of the big issues which came off was this question of robo-signing. When these banks went to repossess the properties which were not performing, the courts asked them, have you got the original documents which have been pledged to you for the mortgages or whatever you have done? And the bank said, no sir. The court said, what are you talking about? Why don't you have the original documents? This is the first principle of banking. They said, we outsourced that to somebody, and that somebody went bankrupt and the warehouse has been destroyed and the documents are gone. How can you get repossession when you don't have original documents? How can this happen? And the bank said, this was of no interest to us. Once we had originated and distributed it, it's the Chinese or the German pension fund holder or whatever is responsible. We didn't have any skin in the business. So this model of securitization is at the heart, obviously together with cheap debt, leverage, ways of managing leverage through risk transfer and so on. The question is, was Islamic finance not involved in this game by design or by default? And Neil has hinted there that maybe we were too young, too new, and too small to participate in this big game. After all, this was alchemy on a massive scale. And so if we had the means, we might also have been there. My question is, how can we address that question? So let's see what we are doing in Islamic finance. Two things. First, as you know, the bulk of Islamic finance today is governed by Islamic banking, especially murabaha and ijara transactions. There is very little mudaraba or risk-sharing transactions or musharaka transactions, which we know and has been mentioned. If that is so, that is the closest mode of finance to conventional finance. It shares the risk characteristics, return characteristics, benchmarks, and so on of conventional finance. If that is 80% of the business, then obviously that business is susceptible to the same question. Following on from there, we have securitization of some of these receivables, possible either in whole in Malaysia or as a mixture in other jurisdictions, essentially securitization, leading to the same pitfalls which conventional finance has been prone to. The next kid on the block and the wonder kid on the block of Islamic finance has been sukuks. These sukuks also have structural problems. We share the same problems with conventional securitization. One is that all of them are conducted through special purpose vehicles, so on, which we are not sure whether ownership is transferred or not properly. They do not have transparency. In fact, in one or two potential defaults of sukuk in the Middle East, we found that there were titles in the SPVs which could not have been acquired by any legal means. For example, you know that in many countries, non-nationals cannot own land, which is fine. This is one of the jurisdictional facts. But in these SPVs, we found non-nationals owning sukuks which had entitlement to land in those jurisdictions. When you want to go to enforce those obligations, the judge will tell you, in principle, you cannot own this land, so you cannot enforce it. In fact, the whole nakedness of the sukuks were covered up by Dubai's willingness to make full payment rather than go for liquidation. Otherwise, we would have been open to a can of worms which we could not have addressed. I think we need to be honest and understand that that is where we were. So you have SPVs, and then on top of SPVs, again, in order to address the motivational question, we have what we call PERs, profit equalization reserves, which are designed to smooth returns or mimic returns from sukuks or deposit accounts with conventional products. These are minefield for management incentives. Managements, of course, want to offer good returns, increase product marketing share, and their bonuses, same as the originate and distribute model. And the controversy about who pays for any black hole in the PERs at the end of the day in sukuks, because they crystallize at the maturity, and in bank balance sheets because eventually the regulator is also going to look at the displaced commercial risk. And so we have also got the same kind of black holes and gray areas which are open to regulatory arbitrage and also bankers slipping through the cracks. To sum up, we have the building blocks of everything which conventional finance has fallen prey to. And if we were big enough, I think we would have fallen into the same trap. So instead, when we are looking at morality, we need to look at two things. One is that by looking at morality or even taqwa or piousness or whatever, by just talking about it and wishing for it, it's not going to happen. This reminds me of a beautiful couplet from Allama Iqbal in his two famous poems, which is Shikwa and Jawab Shikwa, complaint and answer to the complaint. His complaint to God and answer to the complaint. But one of the stanzas, it says that एक जो समझा तो रिजवान समझा, जन्नत से निकाला हुआ इंसान समझा. And the only person who understood what man is are the gatekeepers of heaven. They knew that at the end of the day, man is one who had been chased out of heaven. So he's not perfect, completely fallible, and we need to watch him. And I think by putting an institutional framework rather than pious hopes, which do not allow these things to flourish, is the only way we can move towards creating what we call risk-sharing products. Finally, Professor, I think that Sharia compliance in itself is not enough. I always give this parallel example that we could create thousands and millions of halal junk food outlets, and we could become obese on halal junk food. So is it permissible or not? We have to make sure that it is both halal and tayyib, that it is halal, permissible and wholesome. And in Islamic finance, just ask this question: can you become indebted on Islamic debt? If you can, we have a bit of rethinking too. Assalamu alaikum.